You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech and Future Tech Health podcast, and I have Patrick McKeown. He's an author of a book called Close Your Mouth. Talks about the Buteyko Handbook. Yes, this therapy or this method was named after Dr. Konstantin Buteyko. We're talking about breathing exercises and guidelines that will help people with their breathing. We'll get into more specifically what that means. But Patrick, thanks for coming.
Sure. Thanks very much for inviting me, Richard. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, I've been a mouth breather pretty heavily all my life, so this will be interesting. So tell me a little bit about how did you get into the world of proper breathing, and what's some of your background?
My background was totally different, and I fell into the world of breathing just primarily from having my own issues. It's my background is like I did an economics degree. I was in the corporate world, but for 20 years I had constant asthma. My nose was stuffy. I was mouth breathing, very much upper chest breathing. And if your nose is stuffy, you're twice as likely to have sleep problems. So I used to wake up in the morning very tired. And with that as well, when you have a breathing pattern disorder and you're breathing faster in upper chest, you're more in a fight or flight response. So the simple thing of mouth breathing for me, it had really had an adverse effect on my life. And I read a newspaper article. It was about a Russian doctor. He said two things. He said, you have to breathe through your nose and your breathing should be almost undetectable during rest. Breathe light. So I used his exercise to decongest my nose, and I switched to nasal breathing. And that night I used paper tape across my lips, and I also used breathe right strips across my nose to keep my nose open. And I woke up about the first night was, a little bit iffy because, kind of that change was a big change. But the second or third morning I woke up with my mouth closed, and it was the first time that I woke up feeling refreshed in 20 years. And within a week, My asthma as well was really, really changing. So I knew there was something in it. And the strange thing is, nobody in 20 years of healthcare had told me to breathe through my nose.
Oh, I'm sure, please. They just give you nasal sprays and, they're not going to tell you anything like that, unfortunately.
But even with the nasal sprays, we know that there's thousands of people say will do nasal surgery. They'll use nasal sprays, but they're not necessarily educated to change to nasal breathing. I think the body is one of those things. If we're doing something for a period of time, even when the obstruction is removed, the pattern of behavior is remaining. And I think that's really important, that we try and get that word out there.
Yeah, I know in my own life, people have told me, if I'd say a yoga class or, in many different arenas, breathe through your nose, out through your mouth, in through your nose, out through your mouth. That's what they would say. And I would think, well, I can't. My nose is always stuffed up. So
yes.
I'm very interested. How did you help your nose? For myself, I had to change my diet drastically and have, very little dairy and low carbs, low sugar, and my allergies cleared up. I didn't even really mean them to, but are there other interventions for people that, their nose is always stuffed up?
Yes, yeah. Since 1923, it's been written that if you hold your breath, you decongest your nose. And the exercise we do is a breath hold exercise. So simply, it's not suitable for somebody if they have cardiovascular issues or if they're pregnant. But other than that, it's akin to going for a swim underwater. So the instruction to decongest the noses, you simply just take a normal breath in through your nose, or if your nose is totally stuffed, take the breath in through your mouth. So it's a breath in and out. through your mouth or through your nose, and then pinch your nose with your fingers and stop breathing and go start walking. So walk while you hold your breath and keep walking while you hold your breath until you build up a fairly strong air hunger, and then let go and breathe in through your nose. And wait about a minute, do it again, and do it 5 times with about a minute's rest in between each, and your nose will start to decongest. It's pretty amazing. And, you know, as I said, like this was written, I've seen this written in the medical journals since 1923, that by holding the breath. And the other thing about the nose is that once we start using it and breathing through it, the nose works so much better for us. The problem with nasal obstruction is if the nose is stuffy, we don't use the nose, because as soon as we breathe through the nose, whether it's a child or whether it's an adult, there's a feeling of air hunger. So if the nose is stuffy and the child tries breathing through the nose, the child is feeling they're not getting enough air, so they switch to mouth breathing. And when they switch to mouth breathing, it's completing the vicious circle, because that's feeding into nasal obstruction.
You said mouth breathing contributes to nasal obstruction?
Yeah, no, it's without a doubt. If you continuously breathe through an open mouth, your nose is not going to remain decongested. There's no question on that. And the only reason I say that is because we see the difference when people switch to breathing through their nose. You know, they're going to spend 10 years. We see people coming in maybe 20, 30 years, chronic mouth breathers. And yeah, it takes a little bit of work, because when we first get them to decongest their nose and switch to nasal breathing, their breathing pattern is off. So they'll tend to be breathing faster and they sigh more. They'll have noticeable breathing. They're waking up with a dry mouth in the morning. And if you wake up with a dry mouth in the morning, you're likely to have a lighter sleep. You wake up unrefreshed, and you're also more likely to go to the bathroom during the night. So if your sleep is fragmented, you know, because of light sleep, because of contributed to by mouth breathing, it's affecting your sleep quality, and then that in turn is going to carry into the day. So I think the overall quality of life from such a simple and seemingly innocuous habit as mouth breathing, it's really having an adverse effect on quality of life in both children and in adults.
What happens if you breathe through your mouth for a minute or two? Does it literally stuff up your nose, or does it affect your nose in a negative way?
One study shows that if you breathe in through your nose and out through the mouth, that within 1 minute that the nose starts to get stuffy. That's just by breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. You know, it kind of makes sense in a very hot environment to breathe in through your nose and out through the mouth, because if you breathe out through the mouth, you're getting rid of heat from the body, so it can have a cooling effect. But in a cold environment or in a normal kind of temperature, when you breathe in through your nose is moistening and warming, filtering the air. But there's also a gas called nitric oxide that's released into the nasal cavity. And when you breathe through your nose, you carry nitric oxide into your lungs. And nitric oxide, it sterilizes the air, but it also helps open up the airways. It's a bronchodilator. And it also redistributes the blood throughout the lungs, and that improves gas exchange. So nose breathers typically will have a 10% improvement on oxygen uptake in the blood, just by virtue of breathing through the nose. So a nose breathing is generally deeper because you're using your diaphragm. Nose is directly linked with the diaphragm. Mouth is directly linked with the upper chest. So mouth breathing is fast and shallow. Nose breathing is deep and slow. So yeah, so just, you know, breathing through the nose, it's really boiling down to that.
What about during the day for you? So you got through the night breathing through your nose, but did it translate to the day, or did you have to do extra work to do that?
It takes a little bit of awareness, but it's like anything else. You know, when you're looking at neuroplasticity and when the brain is forming new associations with habits, and generally it takes about 60 to 70 days to form a new habit, not 21 days. But when we have people coming into us, I go through the benefits of nasal breathing. Dr. Morris Cottle, he was an ear, nose and throat from the United States back in the 1970s, and he founded the American Rhinological Society. So, you know, the foundation of ear, nose and throat. And he said that the human nose is responsible for 30 functions in the human body. And I'll give you a couple of examples of it. For example, if you have your mouth open, you're more likely to have a dry mouth, so you've got increased inflammation of the gums. Dry mouth increases dental cavities. Mouth breathing in children can cause crooked teeth because the tongue isn't in the roof of the mouth. Mouth breathing during sleep will increase the risk of obstructive sleep apnea really significantly. Mouth breathing is activating the upper chest, reducing oxygen uptake, fight or flight response. So somebody who's mouth breathing is at a distinct disadvantage. And if they have mouth breathing for a period of 6 months, it's a syndrome. And we don't know the statistic that it's going for adults. I've got one paper, Japanese paper, that shows 17% of adults tested were persistent mouth breathers, but we know in children it can be as high as 50%. Our ancestors didn't breathe through their mouths. This is a relatively recent phenomena. And the shape of the skull is changing as a result of persistent mouth breathing. Because when we have the mouth closed and the tongue is resting in the roof of the mouth, the tongue is developing, the tongue is driving the forward growth of the jaws. So with the mouth closed and the tongue resting in the roof of the mouth, the maxilla, which is the top jaw, tends to be forward on the face, so there's enough room for the tongue in the mouth. And when there's enough room for the tongue in the mouth, the tongue isn't stuck in the airway. So, obstructive sleep apnea, Richard, as you're well aware, it's really becoming an epidemic. And the effect that that's having on, it's really, in terms of even the link with dementia, the link with diabetes, the link with cancer, the link with many, many different diseases. And, the human airway is the size of a hose pipe. That's all it is. So if you think of the human airway as the space at the back of the nose, the space at the back of the mouth, the throat, that's the size of a hose pipe, and that's a good airway. And if you have the tongue falling back into the throat, the airway is compromised, and obstructive sleep apnea is at a greater risk. So, it's coming back to it. Like, I'm talking to parents, we can show statistics, the relationship between ADHD, open mouth breathing, and poor sleep. If the child is tired, they have 10 times the risk of learning difficulties. It's been shown that it reduces IQ and productivity for adults. Any adult who's going around and they're feeling fatigue or they're having fragmented sleep, they're not productive as what they should be during the day. And this gets overlooked. The very premise of how to breathe to improve oxygen uptake and oxygen delivery to the cells is overlooked. And people may be talking about yoga. Again, there's no emphasis on how to breathe during the day, not when you're in the yoga studio. It's all very well breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth in the yoga studio or in the Pilates studio. But how do you breathe when you're walking down the street? How do you breathe when you're watching TV? How do you breathe when you're driving your car? How do you breathe when you get stressed? How do you breathe when you sleep? That's what I'm interested in.
Well, it sounds like it's not just breathing in through your nose, but it's also the position of your tongue. Yes. So it's proper positioning or repositioning of your tongue on a consistent basis. And then I've also heard it's allowing your lower jaw to, I guess, move into a better position, maybe grow forward or move forward because the tongue is up against the top palate. So I've heard from one or two people that over time a person's facial structure will change. Have you experienced that or seen that with people you help, that their facial structure is changing? They look different after a while?
I think mine is. Now, I switched to nasal breathing 20 years ago, but it was only when I met a lady from the States, from Texas, called Karen Samuel back in 2005. She's since unwell now, but we got into conversation, and I switched to nasal breathing in 1997, 98, and I was talking to Karen in 2005, and I said, Karen, I said, where should the tongue be? And she said, it should be up in the roof of the mouth. And I said, how much of the tongue should be up there? And she said, 3/4. And that was the first time I'd heard about it. So again, when we switch to nasal breathing, it doesn't automatically mean that the tongue goes up into the roof of the mouth. So what I do now with the adults and kids coming in is I get them to do tongue pops. And that's basically making a sound like, so you put your tongue up into the roof of the mouth to create a vacuum in order to make the pop sound. But the place where you put your tongue in the roof of the mouth is where your tongue should be all the time. Now, it shouldn't be touching against the top front teeth. There's a little ridge there, just maybe a couple of mil, just a very small distance behind the top front teeth. So you don't want to have your tongue pushing against the top front teeth because it could push the teeth outwards. So you're trying to get your tongue as far forward and elevated, 3/4 of the tongue elevated up into the roof of the mouth. And there's even been a paper now recently that shows a relationship between correct tongue posture and postural stability. So the ability to walk, for example, on an uneven surface. So your stability, your balance is also influenced by the position of the tongue. And, maybe people might find that's a little bit far-fetched, but we've attended conferences, and you could have 500, 1,000 healthcare professionals, the Academy of Orofacial Myofunctional Therapy, for example, and even leading sleep doctors such as Dr. Christian Guilleminault So he discovered obstructive sleep apnea. Well, he coined the phrase. Obviously, the condition was around for a long time before that. It used to be called Pickwickian syndrome. But he coined the phrase obstructive sleep apnea, and he also developed the apnea hypopnea index. And since 2015, he's talking about the critical importance of nasal breathing during sleep. So here's the top sleep doctor in the world talking about the importance of breathing through the nose during sleep, but it hasn't trickled down to the general population, or at least not yet anyway.
Okay, any other elements that we've missed? So tongue posture, breathing through the nose, diaphragmatic breathing. What are there other important aspects to doing this right?
Yes, breathing should be light. So if your listeners, what I would do is when I'm working with somebody, I get them breathing through the nose. Well, first I get them to decongest their nose, and then I ask them to start slowing down the breath. So slowing down the breath, slowing down the speed of the air as it comes into the nose, slowing down the speed of the air as it leaves the nose. And I ask them to slow down their breathing sufficiently so that they feel air hunger. So the whole purpose is designed that you're slowing down your breathing so that you feel that you're not getting enough air. Now, the feeling of air hunger is generated by an accumulation of the gas carbon dioxide in the blood. But as carbon dioxide accumulates, blood vessels open up. So people with cold hands and feet, that's often synonymous with poor breathing. If you're breathing too hard, if you're breathing too fast, you're blowing off too much carbon dioxide. And we have between 70,000 and 100,000 miles of blood vessels in the human body. And literally your blood circulation is affected by how hard and fast you breathe. By slowing down the breath, by practicing to breathe lightly, by having efficient breathing, your blood circulation increases and oxygen delivery increases. So nose breathing, by slowing down the breath, because your nose imposes a resistance to your breathing 2 to 3 times that of the mouth. And also in terms of mental health, Stanford Medical School, if you Google Stanford Medical School and slow breathing, they discovered in March of 2017, they discovered a new structure in the brain in the locus coeruleus. And they said that this structure is spying on your breath. And if you breathe fast during rest, this structure will send signals of agitation to the rest of the brain. And if you really breathe slowly and soft and light, this structure will send signals of calm to the rest of the brain. Now, if you're a mouth breather, you'll tend to breathe fast. So you're in a state of agitation. So people with anxiety, people with depression, people with high stress levels, it's really important to breathe in and out through the nose using your diaphragm, but to slow down the breath. And there's a huge amount of research on this in terms of slowing down the cadence of the breath to 6 breaths per minute, breathing in slowly and deeply for 4 seconds, and breathing out slowly and relaxed for 6 seconds. And that stimulates the baroreceptors in the major blood vessels to help restore normal autonomic functioning. So with normal autonomic functioning, as you breathe in, you should notice that your heart rate is increasing. The speed and the strength of the heart rate increases. And as you breathe out, the heart rate should be slowing down and becoming softer. And that's called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. And that's related with heart rate variability. And it's a good indicator of the functioning of the autonomic nervous system. So say, for instance, if we have individuals, there's research on this for post-traumatic stress disorder, for anxiety, for depression, for chronic heart failure, for sleep, poor aerobic performance, and even heart rate variability as a predictor of longevity. So we want to influence that. And here's the amazing thing about slow breathing. Down to a cadence of 6 breaths per minute, 20 minutes a day, twice a day, for about 4 weeks. And you will be on the path to helping your own health quite significantly at that.
I've heard also, and this may be counterproductive, when someone's nervous or, I don't know. I've heard a lot of people say, oh, take a bunch of deep breaths, but it sounds like that's not right. Don't just take deep breaths. Try to take slower breaths, slower, more measured breaths, and that would work better than just deep breaths.
Yeah, it depends. Like people interpret a deep breath as a big breath. Like if you're stressed and if you take in this huge big breath, it will bring you initial relief because you're stretching everything and then you're relaxing. But all it's doing is blowing off carbon dioxide. What would happen if you took 10 of those big breaths? You start to feel lightheaded because the harder you breathe, the less oxygen that gets delivered throughout the body. If you think of somebody in an extreme hyperventilation, say they're having a panic attack and their breathing is so hard, they're blowing off so much carbon dioxide, and the loss of carbon dioxide is reducing blood flow to the brain. within 30 seconds of hard breathing, you can halve the amount of CO2 in the blood, and this can reduce blood flow to the brain by up to 40%. So all it takes is 30 seconds of hard breathing to reduce blood flow to the brain by 40%. That's why people who were having a panic attack, they used to be told to breathe in and out of a bag. So the bag was simply to trap carbon dioxide. Now, and then to rebreathe the carbon dioxide into the lungs, to increase it in the lungs. And this in turn then increases it in the arterial blood. And as CO2 increases in the arterial blood, then you've got vasodilation, the blood vessels dilate. So I think people have it really mixed up, Richard, out there in public. And I have no idea how this message got out there. The idea that oxygen is good, breathe in as much air as you can, and carbon dioxide is bad, get rid of it. But this
that's what I was going to tell you, yeah.
Discovered back in 1904 by Christian Bohr. It's called the Bohr effect, B-O-H-R. And he simply said that the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood affects pH, and this in turn affects the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen. Now, in simple terms, the red blood cells, which carry most of the oxygen in the blood, release oxygen in the presence of carbon dioxide. So if we're breathing too hard and we're getting rid of too much CO2, not only do the blood vessels constrict, but the bond between the red blood cells and oxygen becomes stronger. The oxygen isn't getting released to the cells. So it's not about breathing in as much oxygen as you can, and it's not about breathing out as much carbon dioxide as you can. It's about having a balance. And really what we want to boil down to is light breathing, in and out through the nose, slow and deep.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Because you're right. My perception was oxygen good, carbon dioxide bad. I'm sure that, we even have carbon dioxide alarms in your house, or carbon monoxide, but also carbon dioxide. And I'm sure the public perception is that carbon dioxide is just bad. It's no help to anybody.
Yeah, carbon dioxide is blamed for greenhouse gases. But the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is absolutely insignificant. It's 0.03%. Oxygen is 21%. And when the human lungs evolved, the concentrations of carbon dioxide were in the tens of percent. So the amount of CO2, the amount of carbon dioxide in the lungs and blood is 5%. So that means 5% of atmospheric pressure. So everybody will be aware that, oxygen is 21% of atmospheric pressure. And if we think of it this way then, carbon dioxide in the air, in the atmosphere, 0.03%. But yet for human survival, we need 5%. So the human body needs so many times more carbon dioxide to be retained in it than what's available in the atmosphere.
I don't know what the implications of that is, but in our exhalation, it's about 5% carbon dioxide, you're saying?
No, well, it always contained within the lungs, in the small little air sacs in the lungs and in the arterial blood. Ultimately, it's the amount of carbon dioxide that's in the lungs which determines the CO2 in the arterial blood. There should be always 5%. So that would amount to 40 millimeters of mercury pressure of CO2, the partial pressure of CO2 in the arterial blood, almost always to be that. And if we are breathing too hard, chronically, so say you have an individual and you notice the person is breathing faster, their upper chest breathing, they sigh every now and again, they have noticeable breathing during rest, their breathing is inefficient, they're getting rid of too much carbon dioxide from the lungs, from the blood. So basically, if you're breathing hard, you're getting rid of too much CO2 from the lungs because you're breathing it out, and this in turn is reducing it in the blood. And then with lower carbon dioxide levels, it increases pH towards respiratory alkalosis. And what happens then, if that continues in the long term, is that the kidneys dump bicarbonate, so the buffering capacity is reduced. So there's a good deal of science behind the whole carbon dioxide theory. Now, not everybody with breathing pattern disorders show low carbon dioxide, so it's not always as clear-cut. But yet, we don't want somebody to be breathing fast and hard and using the upper chest during rest. It's not good.
This is really interesting. So people will come to you. What will they say is the problem when they finally get to you and for help?
Sure. Well, say for instance, I've got a number of different groups I work with. In terms of health, people generally come with anxiety, panic attack, depression, high stress, and also asthma. We've been using it for asthma for almost 20 years. sleep disorder breathing, insomnia, obstructive sleep apnea, and snoring. Because now, and then in terms of sports, we work with elite athletes. We work with every level of athlete. And I have a book called The Oxygen Advantage, and that's going in 14 languages. So for health, we have the Buteyko side of it. And then for sports, we have the Oxygen Advantage. So I suppose we reach out to everybody, everybody, even Olympic athletes can have poor breathing. And if breathing is poor, it's going to impact their performance.
Actually, for Olympic athletes, or for any athlete, breathing properly could add or take seconds off their time and help them really achieve new goals and new medals and new records, I'm sure.
Without a doubt, 50% of athletes, they can be prone to respiratory muscle fatigue. And if they're not breathing correctly, if they're breathing inefficiently, they're wasting energy on supporting the breathing muscles, because there is a cost associated with breathing. And we have a breath hold time. And breath hold time is simply you take a normal breath in through your nose, a normal breath out through the nose. You pinch your nose with your fingers, and you time it in seconds. How long does it take until you feel the first definite desire to breathe? Ideally, a person has a breath hold time. The goal would be 40 seconds. But if you have a breath hold time of above 25 seconds, it's a good indicator that you have functional breathing. Now, the breath hold time measures the chemosensitivity of the body to the accumulation of carbon dioxide. But in very simple terms, if you've got a low breath hold time, it means that you have disproportionate breathlessness during physical exercise. So if somebody comes into me, whether they are an athlete or whether they are just somebody who is in their 40s and they want to do walking or, just basic physical exercise, I will look at their breathing, I will measure their breath hold time, and from that, I will have a pretty good indicator of their exercise tolerance. If that person has a good high breath hold time, they will be able to do physical exercise and they won't feel disproportionate breathlessness. But if somebody comes into me and they have a low breath hold time, if their breath hold time is only 10 seconds, which by the way is very common, I know that they're going to be excessively breathless during physical exercise, but also if they're prone to sleep apnea, they have what's called high loop gain. So when they stop breathing, it means that they have an exaggerated response to the buildup of CO2 in the blood. But basically, if they have a low breath hold time, during the apneic event, when they resume breathing, they will breathe so hard that it will contribute to another apnea. So the condition is feeding in itself. So if somebody comes into me with sleep apnea, I need to get them breathing through the nose, and I need to improve their breath hold time. And in that way, we can help significantly reduce sleep apnea.
Yeah, I was going to ask you more about apnea. What if, if someone's using a CPAP, what if, do you think this would be helpful? What if you had a device that entrains a little bit of extra carbon dioxide in the CPAP? I know too much could probably be very bad, but what if it entrained just a little bit, or it entrained nitric oxide?
Yeah,
breathing into your mouth.
I think it could be an idea, and I would not be surprised if that has been looked at, But the only thing is, though, it's your breathing during wakefulness that's influencing your breathing during sleep. So I'd be more interested in slowing down the person's breathing during the day, have them practice breathing exercise. And the benefit of this is, you practice it during the day, and in time then this becomes your permanent way to breathe. Okay, it takes a little bit of observation, but even still, you're more likely to breathe that way. So then your breathing is lighter during sleep. And in terms of sleep apnea, the whole field of sleep apnea has changed so much in the last 4 years, just in 4 years, because now traditionally sleep apnea was seen primarily as an anatomical issue. The airway was too small, there was collapse of the airway, so it was primarily down to small airway. You might have had receding jaws, for example, but now there's 3 non-anatomical traits or phenotypes. One is called arousal threshold, and that basically means how light or deep a sleeper are you. If you're a very light sleeper, and if you're waking up with the slightest of stimuli, it means that you're going to wake up exhausted, but you don't need to have a really high apnea, hypopnea index to be waking up exhausted. And we want to restore nasal breathing here, because when you breathe through your nose and breathe lightly, your sleep is deeper. So we can help improve arousal threshold so the person isn't waking up so frequently. The second one then is loop gain. So somebody with a high loop gain, they've got a low breath hold time during the day, they're breathing too hard during the day, and then when they stop breathing during sleep, this is followed by really hard breathing, which is feeding back into the apneas. So I want to slow down their breathing and build up their breath hold time. And then upper airway recruitment, because you've got a set of airway dilator muscles in the throat, and these are specifically designed to keep the airway open, both during wakefulness and sleep. But these muscles are related to the diaphragm. Now you can imagine somebody who's mouth breathing during sleep, they're breathing fast and upper chest, and they're not using their diaphragms effectively. And as a result, there's not so much communication going on from the diaphragm to the upper airway dilator muscles. So when we restore nasal breathing, and when we train the diaphragm and start restoring diaphragmatic breathing, as the diaphragm works better, it increases lung volume, and this results in the stiffening of the throat to help reduce collapse. So it's really an exciting time in terms of sleep apnea. If anybody has it that's listening, look at the phenotypes of sleep apnea and, start practicing changing your breathing patterns, because it's something you'll have the tools for the rest of your life. And there's not really, in terms of a cost, it doesn't cost all that much to change your breathing patterns. You can do so much, even for $95 or a book for $10 even, that's the one thing about it.
Well, first of all, what's wrong with breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth? Why is it better to breathe in through your nose and out through your nose? And then I have a follow-up question after that.
So when you breathe in through your nose, you're picking up moisture and heat. And then when you breathe out through your nose traps that moisture and heat into the body. So if you breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth, there's a 42% greater water loss by breathing out through the mouth. So you're more likely to be dehydrated. I'm sure you can remember as a kid going up to a pane of glass and you're exhaling onto the pane of glass, but you use your mouth, because if you breathe out with your mouth, you're leaving so much more fog and moisture in the glass. So mouth breathing is reducing water content, and it's also causing a loss of heat from the body, and the body has expended energy in producing that heat. So it's important to retain it, because it's the conservation or it's the retention of heat and moisture in the body that helps to keep the nose open. So if you breathe in through your nose and out through the mouth, the nose is more likely to be congested.
I've tried just on my own, combined breathing. It takes a little bit of, it's a little tricky, but, breathe in through my nose and through my mouth at the same time. If my nose was congested and I felt too much air hunger, I tried both. Any clinical use of that, is that useful at all, or there's no point?
No, I'd be really switching just to nasal breathing. At the start, it takes a little bit of persistence. Measure your control pause and just see how that is, because if the control pause is low, the breathing is more likely to be faster and harder, and as a result, you might feel that you're not getting enough air through your nose. But it's by practicing the breathing exercise and keep breathing through the nose. If you slow down your breathing to the point of air hunger, within a few days, you'll actually start feeling comfortably breathing through the nose. If we think about the entire nature, the animal world, with the exception of a dog, I'm not aware of any other animals except a gannet, a penguin, a pelican. They can mouth breathe when they are healthy, but no other animal on earth will breathe through the mouth when they are healthy. And it's only when animals become very sick or very stressed that they revert to mouth breathing. Now, our ancestors were innate nasal breathers. Tribal groups are innate nasal breathers, and they know this from the shape of skulls. Anthropologists, when they recovered skulls from, say, upper middle class background in Europe, about 400 years ago, they started noticing the first crooked teeth. And the teeth were crooked because the tongue wasn't in the roof of the mouth, and the tongue wasn't in the roof of the mouth, placing a force or creating the shape, molding the shape of the palate and molding the shape of the mouth to house all of those teeth. So mouth breathers tend to develop very narrow jaws, high upper palate, and crooked teeth. So our ancestors, if you go into a history museum, you look at skulls, you'll see perfectly formed skulls and plenty of room for all teeth. Nowadays, you don't. Something has happened.
Well, this is great, Patrick. So what are some resources you have for listeners to the podcast?
So we've got, our website is ButeykoClinic.com, and I give webinars where I guide people through 2 hours of exercise. They're small groups, but they're online, and we use Zoom. And I've got a specific webinar for sleep, one for asthma, one for panic disorder. They cost $95. So for 2 hours, I guide you personally through it. I guide each person through it. And also you get the recording And that would be a very, very easy way to start becoming comfortable with doing the exercise and also experiencing benefits from it. I've got books. I've got 8 books. So there's books on many different topics, anxiety or sleep, or as you mentioned, close your mouth has been a popular one with dentists and myofunctional therapists. So yeah, I'd say to people, really start observing your breathing, because you can make quite a difference to your health by changing your breath.
Yeah, in Ireland, wouldn't you call the book Shut Your Gob instead of Close Your Mouth?
Well, yeah, I have another one called Shut Your Mouth, but I don't know where people, was it upsetting them? I give training courses and I'd be giving out the book, and in the front cover it says Shut Your Mouth, and already then people are saying, well, what's going on here? So Close Your Mouth is a little bit more acceptable,
Yeah, excellent. Well, Patrick, thanks for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Richard. Thanks very much for having me along.
You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you.